Welcome back, and thank you for joining us tonight. Our last session, let's take a deep dive into what the future holds for transportation.
We'll hear from one of the foremost industry designer in the world, Mr. Paul Priestman, who presents some of the most otherworldly informations in the mobility that would push boundaries of our imagination.
Let's hand the floor over to our moderator, Mr. Darren Chuckery.
Well, good evening, everybody, and it's exciting to go from something such as interesting from floating cities, floating neighborhoods, all the way now to this session where we're talking about the future of transportation. And what does that mean for everybody? I'm here with Paul. Thank you for joining us and flying in.
Not at all. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your role in designing future transportation. It's planes, trains, automobiles. You're designing all of that, and kind of what's your perspective and day-to-day role behind it?
Yeah, I was originally trained as an industrial designer, but I've specialized and become an expert in the design of transportation, everything to do with transportation, whether it's trains, aeroplanes, ships, even spaceships. And you may well have traveled on something that I've been involved in the design of, if you've traveled on the high-speed trains in China or some of the railway trains in Europe or even in the UK. And also, maybe you've flown on one of the Airbus design interiors that I've been involved in.
So you're going to show us kind of the future, as you say, of what's coming next for us, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to take a little snapshot of what's happening around the world, because a lot of people say that the future is here now, and this is my just a quick snapshot of what's going on, and I think things that are relevant to us here in Hong Kong.
So you have a presentation?
I do, yeah.
Let's take a look at that.
Thank you. I was just going to start with, next slide, please. Back one, thank you. I was just going to start with a little bit of a story, actually. I was, just a few weeks ago, I was in a city just outside Beijing. And I was going to a meeting, I got a taxi, and the journey was going to be quite long. So I got in the taxi, and the taxi driver said, I'm going to have to change the battery. I was like, what? You changed the battery? Could you go back to the last slide, please? Sorry. And so I thought, this is going to take forever. So he pulled off the highway and drove into a car park. And there was a line of containers, shipping containers. And a barrier went up because it recognizes the number plate. He drove into something that looked like a car wash. And there was a clunk from underneath the car. And a robot took the battery out from underneath the car and swapped it for a new one. And this is a photograph I took of him over the shoulder. And the guy looked really bored. It was like, this is just happening every day, you know. And I was just going, this is amazing. This is brilliant. You know, absolutely incredible. This is the future. And so it took less than a minute, and we didn't have to get out of the car. I mean, we've been trying to do this with filling cars with fuel for years. It's incredible. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I just asked him to stop before we left. And here you can see this is a series of pop-up containers, shipping containers, where they store all the batteries on one side, and then an automated robot takes out the fully charged and swaps it with the ones that have been used. And this is just quite amazing. Next slide, please. So I don't know whether any one of you have bought a drill recently, but if you buy a drill without the battery, it's a fraction of the cost. And when you're drilling a hole in the wall, if the battery runs out of power, you don't stop and then have to recharge the drill and then carry on with your job sort of 20 minutes later. No, you swap the battery. And if you take that same analogy into vehicles, and particularly commercial vehicles, which I'm going to be talking about mostly today, then you think about the barriers for someone buying an electric vehicle or running an electric vehicle. So the first one they call range anxiety. You're not going to get to where you're going. That's a tick if you can swap the battery. The second one they call charging anxiety, because you've got an electric vehicle. Where am I going to charge it? Can I charge it? And then the third one is that if you own the vehicle with an electric battery, you think that perhaps it's going to degrade and not perform as well as it should. And the fourth and most final one is cost. So if you can separate the battery from the vehicle, then it just gets quite interesting. That's really taken away one of the biggest barriers. And then you can really take that one stage further, is my theory, is then who owns the battery? does actually the battery belong to the people that make the batteries? It's a bit like having your phone and using data. Do you do pay as you go, or do you do it as a lump sum with the phone? And that's when it starts to get really interesting. And there's some other really good examples. I'll show you the next. This is relevant to Hong Kong. This is relevant to London, where my hometown is. And it's buses, and it's refuse collection. It's vehicles running around the cities using diesel power and petrol power. And in Korea, there's a study going on to being able to replace batteries in buses. So if a bus goes along a fixed route, they put in a battery at one end of the route, and then it does its run, and then a new battery is put in at the other end. And this allows the vehicle to then run for long distances. And again, I find this is a really interesting development. I've just come back from Shanghai. I was there for about 2 or 3 months. And every day it was a clear blue sky. And probably about 4 or 5 years ago, it would have been, the air quality would have been bad. So it is possible. There isn't that drum of diesel engines and petrol engines, and there isn't the smell of the fumes. And that's a fantastic example, an amazing accomplishment. And that's been done. It's done. Next slide, please. I think this is one of my favorite projects, and we're going to Rwanda in East Africa. And this is a company called Ampersand. And they have a really interesting idea. In this particular part of the world, a taxi is actually a motorbike. So you hop on the back of a motorbike if you want to go somewhere. And so this company realized that if they could offer electric motorbikes to the taxi drivers, they would actually earn more money. So that's the number one incentive for going green.
Sure, don't have that high gas bill, right?
Exactly. And then they took it one stage further, so that then they said, let's try and talk to local people and see if they could set up shops or little stalls where they could provide batteries so they could swap batteries out. So they're sort of giving livelihood and income to local people. And it's almost, if you think about it, it's almost like the first democratization of energy for moving vehicles. Because previously, perhaps, we've been dominated by a few major petrochemical companies. But I also really love that, can we go back one? I really love that project because the motorbike is actually made locally, designed locally, and it's fit for purpose. And electric motorbikes are so simple because you've just got a battery, you've got a motor and a controller. So it's a wonderful project. Next slide, please. And this is another example. This is from Korea again. And this is a battery swapping system for electric bikes in cities. And I think this, again, is really relevant to Hong Kong, because particularly when you're talking about first and last mile deliveries. And every city has the buzz of motorbikes and fast deliveries. But if we can find a system that allows them to run electric vehicles rather than petrol vehicles, then it's going to make a massive change in the city. And I do think that design has the power to enable people to make the right choice. And I think that most people want to make the right choice. They feel helpless of all the bad news about what's going on in the planet, and they want to do their thing. So it would be very simple. It's something I'm championing in London and other cities, is for newspapers and government to get behind a campaign so that when you're ordering your food, fast food takeaway, or your grocery delivery, you can make the choice to go electric. And it's just a simple button on an app to say, I want electric or pedal. And then going with the shops themselves in a campaign to promote the fact they've gone electric. And those are very simple things that can be done. It's a design change, but it will make such a big difference so quickly to cities. Next slide, please. And I really love this solution here. I mean, how many redundant phone boxes are there in Hong Kong or in London? I mean, they only get used when it's raining, and that's someone with a mobile phone in there. And so this system here is they're actually using the telephone box as a recharging place for batteries. And I think this is another theme which is so important, is that we have to think about how we use the infrastructure we've already built better. because we haven't got time to rebuild everything. And telephone boxes have it all there. Next slide, please.
By the way, what exactly was that again? A telephone box?
A telephone box where you can...
I don't understand what a telephone box is. I have my cell phone.
Exactly, yes, yeah, yeah. Well, they're used for everything they were never designed for. Next slide, please. I think that most people think that electric vehicles of the future and autonomous vehicles of the future are going to be cars that we see as they are. I don't think so. I think they're going to be lightweight. They're going to be vehicles which are designed and implemented very quickly. And this is a trend that's going through the whole of the city, every city in the world, really. These are from New York. You see all the work going on in European cities, where the first and last mile deliveries has gone pedal and electric. They're called e-cargo bikes or e-bikes or e-trucks. And they can carry a lot of weight, a lot of goods, but they're designed in such a way that they look really appealing. They're cool. You know, it's creating a really nice job for someone, and it's appealing. Very different to sitting in a diesel truck, you know, in the traffic. And I think these are the really exciting things. And these are the things that can make a city change very, very quickly. And I think here in Hong Kong, you know, with the battery changing, the hills won't be a problem, and perhaps not even the temperature. Next slide. And Hong Kong, my favorite city, and I look at this image of every square millimeter of it being developed. And what a beautiful, well, you can see it behind us. But the one area that is just sort of free is the harbour and the water. And I just wonder whether cities, because, you know, Hong Kong was built here for trade. And the trade came to the centre of the city. And I just wonder, have we got a bit lazy here? Because we're not using, every city is built by the river. And they're the old highways. You know, would it be good to be able to bring back barges that bring in the goods into the centre of the city and then have e-bikes that disperse these around? Next slide, please. And this is a trend that, again, that is starting to happen in other cities now, trying to think about the infrastructure that exists and reusing it better. This is I think this is in Boston in the United States, and this is a three-wheeler e-bike. And there are so many of these developments going on. So in summary, I think that the things I've shown you are innovations coming from small companies, entrepreneurs, startups, scientists, engineers. And I think the challenge is to how we encourage more of this, and then how cities and governments then help them get it to reality rather than it just staying as a presentation in a late night conference, and rather than it being actually a reality and making a real difference to the environment.
It was interesting also as you started to talk a little bit about the autonomous component of these, and especially towards autonomous deliveries. And how, you know, as an example, in Hong Kong, we have the trucks, they come in, they load and this and that. And I think the future of this, as we were talking about, is quite a bit about it. How do we create more of these autonomous or types of delivery services to really help alleviate traffic and other issues, right?
Yes, yeah, and I think the developments in autonomy is absolutely amazing. The technology that's coming out of that is already showing great benefits to so many different areas. Autonomous vehicles as such, when they're in the city situation, I'm not sure they solve the traffic issue because they're still a vehicle. But I think when you start getting into these smaller delivery pods and things that move perhaps at a different pace. And I in my profession, I've designed the fastest moving objects on the planet, high-speed trains, aeroplanes, whatever. And I do wonder whether, again, what's the rush? You know, why do we have to rush? You know, why can't we allow something to take a little bit longer, not have to worry about the pollution that it creates? And also, it's more streets friendly so that these objects can perhaps run on the pavement without, causing injury.
You know, I was just recently in Santa Monica, and on this very busy street like we have in Hong Kong, all of a sudden this little robotic delivery box was coming down the street. And everyone's like, what's this? And all of a sudden it started bumping. It couldn't get past something. And everybody's looking at it going, what do we do? Do we help it? Do we let it go? Do we let it learn by itself? Finally, somebody's like, okay, let's help it. everybody had to have a discussion. Like, helped it, okay, we moved it, oh great, the little delivery box is moving on. But to me, it was really interesting just how it coexisted as well with all the people walking down the street.
Yeah, I mean, those innovations are brilliant. And I just, aren't humans amazing that they are sort of so accommodating? And so, there's all this talk about autonomous vehicles and are we going to be worried about it and all of this. And then you see a YouTube of someone with an autonomous vehicle sitting in the back with his dog. It's like, it's incredible how humans can adapt very quickly. And I think that's what we have to do. But also, a lot of these autonomous vehicles are electric and are moving in the right direction. But the technology that we need right now is there. And it's just enabling it. And I do think it does come down to legislation and government. And I sort of almost, I don't envy their position because if you're trying to build new infrastructure, it can take maybe 10 or 15 years to build a new railway, for instance. But by then, things may have changed. So I think that's interesting. And that's why I think we need to really reuse what we've got today. And reuse our railway system to a better effect.
So how do we use design as part of this? Because it seems like what you've shown us today, some very creative, I would call it entrepreneurial solutions to problems. But yet on an infrastructure build and on city builds, we're so far over here.
Yeah.
How do these two worlds meet? And how do the designers tap into the government, the infrastructure side of the world, and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, in Europe, there's some quite interesting case studies now of people running privately owned trains on government-owned infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And they pick a route and they run a train at a very, very low cost. And I think that's very interesting because that's the public-private investment. And I think that's the future in some respects of how things can move more quickly. Because I don't think the innovations are necessarily coming from the large, the government organizations. Again, it's that interlink between the innovators and the designers and creatives. And as I say, I don't envy government trying to pick your way through that, but it is going to change. I mean, for instance, in some cities in Europe during the COVID or after the COVID infection, many of the streets have sort of been reclaimed. Cycling became mainstream when previously it was perhaps seen as sort of marginal. So walking and cycling, as Hong Kong, has such fantastic walkways. It was designed so brilliantly for walking. But I think that's a big change in many cities, and I'm not sure that will change back so that you can walk or cycle long distances across cities, and all for the better.
And where do you see the sharing vehicles happening? Like we saw where we started, with bikes.
Yep.
We saw in China, thousands of bikes piled up. Where are they doing that?
Yeah.
How has this evolved? And do you think that this is a common area that we're going to do a lot more in the future with transportation and sharing, whether it's cars, electric scooters, or whatever?
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges in traffic in cities, particularly with people, although I do think most of the traffic congestion is commercial, is how we stop, rows of cars with 2 or 3 people in them, or one person mostly. And there's been lots of talk about how you encourage people to share taxis, for instance, share a taxi ride. But the problem there is it comes down to design, because the taxi wasn't designed to share. So it's a bit like someone coming to sit on the sofa with me as a stranger sitting in the back of a car. And, and it's just uncomfortable. You don't want to do it. And that comes down to design, because you could design the interior of that vehicle to be shared. And I think once that was done, then that area would become more popular and the word would get out. Yeah.
You've been in China seeing, I think they're quite far evolved in a lot of these areas and interesting ones. Asia, you said, is this really this creative hub happening? What's some of the key things that you've learned in this process recently?
Well, I mean, I think that the areas that I'm involved in China is high-speed rail, the design of those vehicles, and there's some interesting developments in sort of hybrids, so suspended monorail. which is a new development that's taking off in many cities. And that's basically the train is hanging rather than sitting. And it's not a new idea, but it's high speed. And I think the main interest in that is that the disruption in building those lines is minimal, because you can build them down the middle of highways. And I think that's quite an interesting technology, which I'm doing quite a lot of work in at the moment.
Where does smart fit into this? We hear e-mobility, but then I was corrected by somebody that said, no, don't ever call it e-mobility, it's smart mobility.
Yeah, I mean, interconnectivity, I think, is again, one of the barriers, or the non-interconnectivity is the barriers for taking public transport. It's those interchanges. And technology with your app and guidance, multimodal, where you buy a ticket and it includes perhaps a taxi, a bus, and a train. It's on the same ticket. I think these are the big developments which will increase people's use of public transport. And I mean, I'm very passionate about public transport and mass transit, and I think that's the way forward. Because when it works well, it works so brilliantly well. And in Europe, again, some of the governments have asked that the airlines stop flying domestically because they have alternatives, as in using rail. And I think that's the right thing to do. And in China as well, you know, some of the routes now, you'd be crazy to take an aeroplane because of the delays, and you go from city center to city center. And that's an amazing development.
But I think part of the smart transportation also is the fact that, as you were saying, you have an app. Let's say my map. I want to go to M+.
Yeah.
So it's now, instead of having the Google Maps going here, walking, all of this, it's going to be, how do you start connecting this with your taxi, with possibly a bike parked here for the last bit or whatever the last mile. So is this close, or is this something really difficult to try to connect all of the different partners around something like this?
No, that's happening already. I mean, there's a good example. I was working with Lufthansa, where if you were taking a flight from outside the country and then landing, you wanted to go to another city, the ticket would include the train journey as well, with the connection. So it's one ticket, but part of it would be by rail, although it's unbeknown to yourself. So that's the interesting thing, is how we can again encourage people to take greener transport, and it is beginning to happen. We need to speed it up.
So in our last 2 minutes, some rapid fire thing. Most exciting thing that you think is going to come down the pipeline in the next 12 to 18 months?
I would like to think that electrification pedal of inner cities, I think, is going to take off rapidly, because I think the economics are there. So there's the incentive for the delivery drivers to use electric. They just need to be enabled to do it. And I think that's a lot to do with design and infrastructure.
Designers, word of advice to designers. How do you get into this? You started off as an industrial design, right? But what if I'm not in industrial design?
It's never too late. I think I'm all for re-educating, and I think just go off and study at an art college. Yeah.
Biggest challenge you faced in the last 12 months?
Travel.
But you're here in Hong Kong, so it's all great, right? So I think from yourself and your own perspective then, what piece of advice do you give to the governments in working in more of these creative places and designers and ideas? Because it's a long-term process. How do we speed this up?
Yeah, it has to be a private and public partnership. And it's really looking at it, speak with the experts, speak with the people that know what they're doing, and have a longer-term plan, and then try and encourage and help these innovations, some of them which I've shown today, come to fruition, because they are going to happen. It's coming.
What's the favorite project that you've designed to date? The first thing that sticks out in your mind?
My goodness, the CR 400, the high-speed train in China. I think it's one of the best-looking trains in China.
Well, it's been interesting. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been so nice to welcome you back to Hong Kong, and hope you enjoy the rest of your visit while you're down here. So I think in wrapping this up, it's interesting. Tomorrow night we're going to be back. We look forward to seeing some of those sessions, and we're also going to be talking about the metaverse on Friday, which is very exciting. How are we going to connect transportation and the metaverse? I'll bring it up. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darren, and thank you, Paul, for such an intriguing session to end our night. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Special thanks to all our moderators and speakers who've brought us many engaging discussion and inspiring ideas. And if you would like to know more about BODW, please visit 2022.bodw.com.
Tomorrow, more leading designers and industry experts will embark on discussions on how design can help transform brands and create new art experiences. Make sure to catch the summit tomorrow at 8 p.m. on View TV 6. Have a great evening and see you all tomorrow.